I mean, I am thankful that you are here. I should have mentioned in the last segment that you were here. It might have rung as a surprise to some people, but I wanted to talk to you about a move that was made on what Mike Ryan was arguing is the most famous basketball announcing team of any kind, broadcasting, since Marv Albert. Mike Breen, Jeff Van Gundy, and Mark Jackson worked for, I think, they didn't work for 17 years together. I think Van Gundy and Breen worked that long together, and then Jackson joined the mix. But now they've been replaced. Mark Jackson, I know Jeff Van Gundy was surprised. Mark Jackson seemed like he had survived it, and it seems like he was also surprised. And what I imagined there is that they were just waiting to negotiate a deal with Doc Rivers, and so they couldn't get rid of Mark Jackson until they had hired and secured Doc Rivers. But now it's Doris Burke, Doc Rivers, and Mike Breen. What did you think of that? And does any of that matter? Because to me, as someone who largely consumes these things with the sound down, I almost don't care at all who is broadcasting, that you can only get my attention if you are truly awful, and most of the other pieces I view as interchangeable. So I imagine Doc Rivers and Doris Burke and Mike Breen will be about as good as Jeff Van Gundy, Mark Jackson, and Mike Breen.
Yeah, let me start with that. Both of these people are great at broadcasting. Doris obviously is awesome. Everyone knows. We don't need to reiterate. She's literally a Hall of Famer at this. And Doc Rivers, for a lot of the younger listeners, they won't remember. Doc, when he stopped playing, he was doing color analysis.
Very good.
For Spurs Local and for Turner National. And he did such a good job. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he might have been the first, hey, I like listening to you talk about the game. Why don't you be my head coach? Like that thing that Mark Jackson has done and Steve Kerr has done. Now we've seen it happens a lot more often. I think Doc Rivers was the first one of his ilk to go from playing to the broadcast booth and from the broadcast booth to head coach immediately. And that's when he went to the Orlando Magic, and he did a great job in the first year with a very ragtag roster. They ended up being 500 when everyone thought they were going to be one of the worst teams in the league, and he won Coach of the Year. And that's kind of the legend of Doc Rivers started there. So even after he left Orlando, before he went to Boston, he did the ABC Finals, the NBA Finals on ABC with Al Michaels. So you're talking about a guy who's really good at broadcasting. And I think that's kind of helped him as well as a head coach because he knows how to deal with media because he has that background.
I believe that Doc Rivers' greatest strength post-career is talking.
For sure.
But I'm not kidding you when I say that as a coach, leader of men, one of the great coaching failures when it comes to important basketball games. His resume has more important losses on it than almost any coach. A coach usually doesn't get many chances to do the failure that he has done, and I believe that Doc Rivers has made much of his post-playing career retirement money in just being charming as a talker.
He's very good at talking, you're right. But, I mean, to the original point and original question by Dan, I like Mike Breen. I like Jeff Van Gundy. I like Mark Jackson. They were a great trio, great at calling games. But the replacements are really, really good. It's going to take them a minute to form the chemistry that those three had.
For sure.
But I don't care if no one's calling the game. If it's a game I want to watch, I'm going to watch the NBA game. Like, people get outraged about this stuff. And I guess I understand why, but if you want to watch a basketball game, you're not tuning in because Mike Breen is calling it.
Right, and we've had this conversation before. We talked about Tom Brady being offered $8 billion, gajillion, trillion, bajillion dollars to call games, and it's like, who cares? I'm going to watch Monday Night Football or whatever anyway. That's all well and good, right? But I think there is something very important that happens, and we know that from kind of the stories that have come out a little bit is the league hasn't been too thrilled with Van Gundy in particular because he can be very critical, particularly of officiating, but also of the game, of things like load management, things like that. And
he is somebody who gets criticized for not liking basketball enough because of the way he's talking about it, not just from the commissioner of the league. You
are the voice. Stugotz, you're right. I'm not going to stop watching the NBA Finals because Jeff Van Gundy's calling it or
Right,
whatever.
right.
But
Or he's not. Right.
But or when, however many million people are watching, this is the most watched event in our sport, and you're getting bombarded with kind of a negativity. I could see from the league standpoint of like, yo, we're trying to do a thing here. We're trying to sell this. We're trying to like let people be excited about it and be optimistic about it. And I do always point this out, and the same goes for the Turner guys, the Turner Studio guys. We're the only sport that continuously shits on the current product and says everything was better 20 years ago. Nobody is saying in football, no one's walking around saying, man, I'm telling you what, Boomer Esiason would be the best quarterback in the league right now. No one says in baseball that, Doc Gooden would be the best pitcher in baseball right now. We all kind of accept that the modern version of this is the best version in the same way that no one looks at Usain Bolt and says, Carl Lewis would have just smoked him. But our sport, for whatever reason, lives constantly in the past. Our players constantly fight ghosts. They're not playing – LeBron's not playing Steph Curry. He's playing Michael Jordan. And part and parcel of that is
and losing.
Part and parcel of that is you do need like a breath of positivity in it. That's from that standpoint, I don't think you're right. People don't turn off or turn on the game, but our overall perception of the game can be colored by the people who are bringing it to us at the highest profile moments.
There are a couple of things that are interesting about this to me, because I do believe the people listening to this who are sports fans do believe that coaches, as leaders of men, and because we want to believe in the idea of the coach knows how to strategically toughen and strengthen this group of people. I believe a lot of people think about sports that it is merit-based. And what you just said, the evolution of guy talks on television well about basketball. Therefore, let me hire Doc Rivers to become my coach because he broadcasts well and had a good Orlando team. And let me watch him lose every damn Game 7 and every 3-1 lead that he has. Because why would that happen? Oh, because I've hired a broadcaster to do this.
Counterpoint, Dan. Counterpoint. He's a top 15 coach of all time. He was voted one of the top 15 coaches of all time. So it's like, he's not a bad coach. Let's get that straight.
He's got more failure on his resume that is apocalyptic than anyone other than George Karl, who is considered a good coach.
Yes, absolutely. But in the same breath, Jerry West is 1-9 in the finals. 1-9 as a player in the finals. We never talk about that. We talk about Mr. Clutch. We focus on he's a good player who happens to have a terrible track record in the most high-profile moments. I would say the same about Doc
I'm
Rivers.
just talking about the general stupidity of hiring
of
your leader because he talks on television about good stuff.
You know how that works, right? That's someone who makes billions of dollars, watches TV and says, I like how the way he sounds. Give me that guy. Bring me that guy. That's how that works. None of that makes sense, right? The idea that, because you sound like that, that should be the reason why I should hire you. But that's what happens when billionaires have hiring power on really micromanaged positions.